Okay, I mean, I think we should just get started. Yeah, so for everyone, greetings and greetings, Jesse. Welcome to F3 Nation and to all the packs out there in the UK and also beyond. Super stoked that you've joined us for this chat on mental toughness. We call it an F3 esse quam videre, which is to be rather than to seem. And the more I hear about your work, Jesse, the more I really realize how that resonates with mental toughness. So for all of you out there who are listening, I'm Duncan Micklam, 38, Safari. I'm joined by Jesse, who's a great friend of mine, who goes back a long way to our childhoods in Zimbabwe. Jesse, maybe you can just give us a quick introduction to yourself and tell the packs more about you.
Hey, well, thank you, Duncan. And listen, real honored to be here with you guys. And since Duncan moved back from the US to UK, you know, been really interested in some of the work he's been doing with F3 and a very, very noble cause. So delighted to be invited here today to talk about things that I just love talking about, and hopefully there could be a bit of help and a bit of influence along the way. But hey, listen, I'm not the world's expert on this. This is just my own life, my own experience, and things that I am researching and things that I'm trying to teach as well along the way. So in regard to myself and a bit of my background, as Duncan said, I come from Zimbabwe, grew up on a farm, very similar to Duncan, very similar backgrounds. Duncan got the hair genes a lot better than I did. So I think, yeah, I was trying to blame my kind of upbringing on a farm in Zimbabwe and stuff. But, you know, Duncan's hair is looking a lot better than mine these days. So, so yeah, good. All the schooling in Zim, you know, just an amazing way to grow up, played a lot of sports, and eventually came over to the UK for a gap year in 2001. And that gap year turned into about a 25-year process of playing squash, training squash, traveling the world, and then eventually transitioning into a coaching career. And yeah, I suppose lockdown like really sucked for all of us. But on a personal note, I try to find a bit of an opportunity and a bit of space in that lockdown period, and hence created SquashMind, the app we might talk about today a little bit, which is all about mindset, mental toughness, training, making that into a habit. And I suppose that brings us up to where we are today, really.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I've spoken so much to you about F3. I feel like you're one of us. My EH, or my emotional headlock to get you to your first workout, will continue. We'll get you there one of these days.
Sorry. I know. I love getting up early every morning, but I just can't seem to just get past that hump of the F3 time. So credit to all of you guys, man.
So by the way, congratulations on the signing of your partnership with the World Tour, the PSA World Tour, and also with Hed. It's amazing, and really the kind of stuff dreams are made of, and really a great example of how kind of adversity drives innovation. So yeah, congratulations. We'll talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, massive kudos for getting those partnerships in place, and really respect for the quality of what you built in the form of SquashMind. So just to get us started, so esse quam videre is a cornerstone quote in F3. It translates, as I mentioned, to be rather than to seem. The reason for this saying is pertinent for us is when you seem, it's how you feel, not necessarily how it is. So how you feel changes from hour to hour, day to day, depending on life circumstances. Whereas kind of seeming allows you to be ruled by your emotional surges, which are really a lack of preparedness. Whereas being is this desired state of resilience or fortitude that counters what life throws our way. It requires commitment and discipline, and in F3 we call it the DRP, the daily red pill, which is the hike up the rocky path and kind of making those tough decisions and really just keep on pushing through adversity rather than being bashed left and right by it. So we're lucky to live in a world with a lot of free choice. We live at our discretion with our choices and actions. But obviously with discretion it can really hold us captive, because when we have discretion, we're really at the mercy of how much willpower we have to make good choices. And so really what it boils down to is kind of routines and habits. And if we can get into good routines and good habits, then we get more desirable action with less kind of willpower. We don't really have to think about stuff. It just happens. So if you get used to getting up early, then you don't have to think about it, and you might be able to come to your first workout. So in F3, we try to embed the right routines and habits in our daily rhythm so that we don't utilize quite as much willpower. And the more I've heard about SquashMind and what you do, this is very much what SquashMind is all about, kind of routines and habits. So maybe with that, could you give us a little bit of an introduction to SquashMind in the context of kind of habits and routines and daily rhythms?
100%. And yeah, listen, Duncan, those messages really run strong through SquashMind, but it's not just through the lens of squash and sport, it's how this spills over to life as well. And yeah, quite funny you're asking this, because I gave, I think, 3 online lessons today. So I work quite a lot with some American kids, boys and girls, all trying to get into these really high level colleges. And yeah, two or three of the lessons today were all on habits and behaviors and understanding that. And one of the big things, there's so many threads I want to pull on here. Let me try and make it really clear. I've written a piece that I call Goal Setting Redefined, and as a headline of one of my articles I've written. And what I redefine goal setting as is habit and behavior setting. So I think we can have these amazing lofty goals, and yes, we can try, be a world #1 squash player. We can try have the status or reach this level we want, but that doesn't really do it for me. What I say with goal setting is have a goal, put it on a shelf, frame it in a nice golden frame, and you know what? You're never really going to pull it down again. You're just going to have it there. But what you want to try do is break that goal down into its smallest individual pixels, its smallest individual parts, which become your habits and your behaviors. And when you really can grapple with that and understand that it's about setting the habits and behaviors that align with that goal you want to get to, that's where the real power lies. And habits and behaviors definitely take a bit of willpower to get going, but it's understanding that it's about starting small, starting often, and getting the traction of those habits and behaviors. And if I'm linking this to the app, that's the ultimate goal. There's I think over 350 lessons in the app, and I'm not expecting people to go in and go, hey, right, I'm going to kind of get 50 lessons in today. It's all about creating this habit for checking in with your mind, having almost these little thought experiments with yourself, going, right, what am I doing today? Is this habit aligned with the dream I have tomorrow? And that's a huge part, I think, of the mindset I'm trying to wrestle with myself, as well as a lot of the players I'm working with. It's trying to remove the pressure of the uncontrollable factor. And for me, the uncontrollable factor is the goal. The goal, for all intents and purposes, is uncontrollable. When, if you can understand the habits and behaviors you do, that you should have 100% control over, and then you can become very accountable to that. So yeah, it's such an interesting divergent topic, and it can all kind of, how to put this, it does need to connect, of course. And the big question I ask the players I work with is how. You always got to ask how. And apparently, you got to ask how 5 times in a row. So I want to be a top 10 in the world player. Okay, how? Okay, I've got to win more matches. How? Okay, and then you get the players to think, okay, I've got to win more matches. I've got to extend the rallies more. Okay, how? Okay, I've got to extend the rallies by getting myself slightly fitter. Okay, how? And you just keep asking that question, how? And you get to that point of that is actionable and that's deliverable. That's the big thing I'm always trying to work on with habits. What's actionable and what's deliverable? And from there, you can start to really hold yourself accountable. We might talk at some point, Duncan, around about how to actually go and implement that type of stuff. But yeah, again, I'm really glad you talked about habits, because it's a huge topic for me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Sometimes goals can be a bit maybe amorphous, or you don't really. It takes a bit of time to actually figure out what your goal might be. But what I really wanted to touch on, I mentioned it in the beginning, was how adversity can really drive the most amazing things to happen. And so you talk about uncontrollable factors. So COVID hit. The world went into lockdown, and you had mouths to feed, bills to pay, a livelihood. But as a self-employed squash coach relying on face-to-face contact, your livelihood disappeared. Tell us what went through your head, and how did you stay disciplined, and when there was all these uncontrollable factors happening, and but yet you somehow emerged with SquashMind.
Yeah, I'd probably give you the kind of the story to give a bit of context. So what started happening at the beginning of lockdown was all the home workouts. So, physical workouts, and then for squash, you'd find a wall and you'd be tapping balls up against the wall, and you'd be doing these little things. And yeah, after about 3 or 4 weeks, players were like, oh God, I've done this so much now. What am I going to be able to do? So one of my players reached out and he said, well, what can I do? I think I'm physically doing okay. I can tap a ball against the wall. It's not real squash, but I know I let myself down mentally. And that got me thinking. I was like, okay, so I sent him a quick little audio recording of a visualization, very big into visualization. And it's actually, there's some interesting brain studies when you do vivid visualization of the thing you're trying to work on, the brain can't tell the difference. The same parts of the brain are waking up and the neurons are lighting up. So I started to send these small visualization audio clips to one of my players. And the more I sent them, I then put them on an iCloud, on a SoundCloud account. So he could access them there, and then send them to a few more players. And it started to grow and grow. And then it just became this little process of actually every day I was in lockdown, I was going to go, okay, well, I can either choose my response, is what I was thinking. I'm going, yeah, it sucks. My income's gone almost to zero now. I'm not earning any money whatsoever. And I don't know when I am. I was a bit stranded on my parents' farm in South Africa. There was no flights going from South Africa to the UK. Eventually got on a repatriation flight about 3.5 months later, which was a whole rigmarole story in itself. And it was every day I woke up and I was like, right, I've got a choice to make. I can either choose to be a bit cross and angry and upset with the world, or I can choose to go, well, let me try and create something. Let me try and help someone else. And actually, a lot of it came from this idea of almost helping someone else. That's actually pretty much where the driving force was. And the more I started to do it, the more feedback I got from some of my players going, wow, okay, I'm really starting to visualize myself hitting that ball, visualizing myself taking that ball into the front, visualizing myself being under pressure and not winning the match and then winning the match, or running these plays in our mind as much as we could. And actually, the more I think I started to create that content, the more it was helping me. Even though it was helping others, ultimately it was getting me to reflect and go, okay, wow, this is something I can do as a bit of a habit, a daily habit. And look, I had the luxury of walking on a farm and had loads of big fields and moving around everywhere, but it was just part luck that I had the time and the space to do it, but then part my own drive and I don't know, just a bit of personal determination. It didn't ever feel like it was going to be an income, if I'm brutally honest. It was like, hey, I'm going to enjoy this for what it is right now, because I might not ever have the opportunity to create content of this nature again. And then as soon as we started getting back to some normality, there was a massive appetite for the mental health aspect, the mental toughness aspect. How do we deal with adversity? I'm very big into the stoic philosophy and really talking about we don't control what happens, we control how we respond. And I do a lot of work around that. It also reminds me a little bit of Viktor Frankl's quote in Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space, we have the ability to choose. So the stimulus happens, we have a response, but actually there's a space, and we always have that space. And for those who don't know, Viktor Frankl was in the concentration camps in Germany. He was a psychologist, and he was a Jewish person, and his whole family got wiped out. And yeah, so it was these little lessons. I think I was reading around the point of COVID, reading a lot of Stoic stuff, reading Man's Search for Meaning. And I wouldn't say it made me mentally tougher. It was just something along the lines that it just gave me a little bit of a purpose, a bit of a reason, and it gave me energy. I think that was a big thing. It gave energy, and that energy started to get more and more fueled, I think, the more I did it. And then it ultimately clicked into a bit of a habit, and then it went from there, really.
So I've got a question here from Boris, which is exactly what my next question was going to be. So he said it was great that with all that time to think and ponder, you didn't fall into a negative self-speak cycle. And yeah, I mean, my question to that was going to be, did you ever feel like quitting? And really, what do you feel stopped you from quitting, or kind of kept you driving forward when you couldn't act, when you didn't actually know, you didn't have a goal, you were just doing what you loved?
Yeah, I think I think it comes back to, in honesty, I never felt like quitting because it never felt like I was having to do it. I got to do it. That's a big difference. It's a huge thing I talk about with growth and fixed mindset. If you look at something and you tell and you have to do something, actually, can you just change that word have to get? So for me, that really helps me to think about things. Okay, I have to take the trash out. I have to wash the dishes. I have to go and give lessons. I have to drag myself to work. You know what? I get to do a lot of this stuff. And, the stuff that I think I have to do is some other person's paradise. Not invalidating mental health and struggles in the first world, in this amazing world we live in. But I like this, that the idea that I didn't ever think I got into a negative cycle, because I was doing it. I wasn't even doing it for people. Yes, I said it was kind of for some of my players and stuff, but I got to do it as well. And it felt like more of a, sounds a bit big, this, but more of a calling rather than anything else. It was like, hey, so, it's hard to predict. No one knew what was going to happen during COVID at a certain point, but I just thought, you know what, we can forecast so much into the future. We can try and connect so many thousands of dots. But what am I doing right here in this moment with my time? Like what is this moment producing? And that's what I try to rely on a lot. And if we talk at the high level of competitive sport, the issues is dwelling and forecasting. As soon as you dwell and as soon as you forecast, you're losing that little thin space of time, which is now, which is this moment. And a lot of the mental toughness we talk about at high level sport is the ability to have that quiet mind, to not dwell and to not forecast. And that doesn't mean you ignore the past and don't predict some of the future. But when you're coming to do your actions, your behaviors, your habits, how can you be more in that moment and realize that this moment right now is where it should be? It's a lot of us talk about the destination. Oh, if I reach that ranking, or I have that status, or I get that car, or I reach that house, or I have that relationship. Oh yes, that's it. That's going to make me happy. It's this future projection of if I just get to that, that's me satisfied. And I've had to work hard previously as well in the last few years to really kind of rewind that and go, future happiness is not a construct that I reach. It's in this moment right here and right now. And if I can get energy from what I'm doing and do it for myself ultimately. One more little point. I know I've got a few little strands I'm going with here, but I talk a lot about running your own race. There's so much of this world and life where we're possibly looking for external validation from others, from society. We see these success stories, we see all these amazing things. And can you turn the mirror on yourself and run your own race? Can you be your own yardstick and your benchmark for success? Success, I don't think personally should come from other people's validation. I'm a little bit more like, right, can success be based on your benchmarks and your yardstick and running your own race in that sense? So I think maybe that's a long way around of answering the question there, but I think there's all these little connections. So there's not one definitive, negative self-speak and how did I stop that? I think there's lots of little layers and lessons that come into this.
I love the dwell and forecast. Yeah, I personally find myself often thinking about the future, where I need to go, and actually lose gratitude for what I actually have right now. Just a quick one. Your mic, I think, is giving a bit of feedback. So
thanks. Yeah, I'm gonna kind of hopefully do that. So cool. Just let me know if it does it again.
Okay. There's research out there that says that exercising and playing sport doesn't necessarily make people immune to mental health challenges. And that research has found that up to 35% of elite athletes suffer from mental health crises, which may manifest as stress, eating disorders, burnout, or depression and anxiety. The right attitudes and mental skills being critical for achieving superior outcomes and kind of being the best version of yourself. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about your own personal story around this, how you feel like you've been there, done that, and kind of got the t-shirt per se, and what some of the thoughts swirling in your head might have been?
Yeah, 100%. I think, yeah, I think the reason I'm doing what I'm doing now and so passionate about the mind and working on this is, I'll be really blunt here. I felt I failed as a professional player. I was a failure, but it was a failure because of my mind. I let myself down mentally so many times. I had the skill set. I beat many top 10 in the world players, but the week I'd beat a top 10 player, I'd lose to someone ranked 400 in the world. So, and it wasn't anything to do with technical ability or skill. It was all to do with the mind. And I never really got to the bottom while I was a pro player of why that was. And part of what I'm trying to do now is unpack and reflect a lot back what my career was like, to try help the players that come to me or want help from me, to go, hey, listen, these were the lessons I was never exposed to as a player. And if I had heard certain lessons, and we might go into these at some point, there's the Chinese farmer, very famous kind of the Chinese farmer lesson, which I just love. It's the word maybe, and I can expand in a moment if you want. And all these lessons that I love giving now and talking about now, about habits, behaviors, the lens that we look at, with the lens we look through for our lives. I didn't have the right lens when I was a pro player. I was results orientated. I was status orientated. A lot of it was fueled by the ego. And it was understanding now, reflecting, going, yeah, of course, at competitive sport, you need that fire, you need the drive. But a lot of it was actually because of validation from others. It was like I was trying to please others. I wasn't running my race. And yeah, talking about mental health of top athletes, I wouldn't say I ever had a mental health crisis, but I lost the essence of who I was. I wasn't a nice person. Let's put it this way. If I was winning matches, I was the best person to be around. As soon as I was losing matches, just do not come inside of me. And my identity was so wrapped up in my results, my ranking, what I was doing, and really unhealthy, really, really unhealthy place to be. And so when I do work with a couple of top professionals, a couple of these college kids, or the pressure of these kids going to college, they're so fixated on getting to Stanford, Yale, Harvard, and it's just there's so much pressure. So actually, I think when I speak to them, it's like a nice little relief. It's a come down because their coaches are on their back, their parents are on their back, and I can see all these mental health cogs turning in their mind, going, oh, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to have these thoughts and feelings. It's actually okay to, sit with the frustration a little bit and be okay with not being okay. And I'm really glad I feel I actually have the platform to talk about this. And actually, even if one kid hears the right message at the right time, and they can go, do you know what? I'm going to be me. I'm going to run my race. I'm not going to do it for anyone else besides myself. And my definition of success is going to be based on my benchmark and my validation. So yeah, the mental health angle at sport, and of course sport helps a lot. But actually, when you're getting sometimes to the cutting edge of the high level sport, man, it can really tip the other way. And because it's so results outcome orientated, that becomes a dangerous territory.
It reminds me of a lot of the farmers in Zimbabwe whose identity was defined around what they had, the lifestyles that they lived, the material assets that they had around them, and then in one foul swoop, those assets were expropriated. And I think a lot struggled in terms of their identity, because their identity was wrapped up in things, material things that could easily be lost, whether it be jobs, whether it be material assets. And it's very much aligns with what you're saying there now. It's really interesting.
Just to maybe expand on that, I'm not sure how you feel about this, Duncan, or anyone else listening. The hedonic treadmill or hedonic adaptation. Have you come across that, Duncan? The concept of,
I've not.
yeah, it's again something I've really wrestled with, and again I'm very open and happy to say this. I've gone, at probably 3 months ago, finalized a 2.5-year divorce, and so going through COVID and everything. So I was going through a divorce at the time as well, and yeah, it really sucked. Of course it did. It's horrible. But what it kind of taught me as well was the hedonic treadmill is, as soon as we get something, we get that dopamine hit, and that's great. And we whatever it's a material thing or even a status thing. And actually, to even reach that dopamine level again, we need to go above the thing we've just got. And someone's always going to have something slightly better, slightly faster car, slightly bigger house, slightly better status. And we get on this treadmill of always wanting more and more and more, whether it's material, whether it's relationships, whatever it may be. And just to reach those levels of that dopamine hit you get, you're continually striving for these bigger and bigger things. So part of me, and part of what maybe everyone's thinking, is going, well, actually that's human progress and that's how we move forward. Yes, of course that is. But how can you understand that actually you're not defined by your material possessions or the status? I think the society thinks it is, and society turns that on us. And yeah, it's almost like how we can, I'm not for 1 second saying, go buy a Hessian sack and go live in the streets kind of thing. But you know what? It's getting to the point of where does your true energies lie, and where are you putting your focus and your effort and your intention? Is it to get that great house, car, status? If it is, that's okay. If you're coming at it from a balanced perspective, not that it's the definition of your life in a way. So yeah, there's some, and again, for high level sport, that's where it gets interesting, because most high level sports people want to become world number one. And of course, like we don't want to lose that fire. You want to get that. But if you don't get there, are you a failure? Are you just like a shell of a person? And it's the idea of what have you done along the way? What is the person you've grown into? Have you forged relationships? Have you cooperated with people? Have you moved the ball forward in whatever domain you're in? And for me, it's about almost reversing and reflecting on that, rather than the things we have, the things we own possibly. So yeah, the hedonic treadmill, if anyone's interested, just you can Google it. It's a really kind of thought experiment concept.
That's fascinating. And one of the questions came in from Boris, and he asked if you've had any of your students who you work with, they find their value or their purpose, and they make a decision not to progress further in sport, or basically do kind of quite a radical U-turn in where they were headed.
Yeah, well, one example comes to mind straight away. I not necessarily linked massively with SquashMind, more my physical coaching, but there's another couple of examples I can give. A guy called Andy Whittle, lovely guy. He was about a 14-year-old when I met him, glasses, really nervous, like couldn't lift his head up, couldn't give eye contact, looking at his shoelaces. Started coaching him squash, had a massive identity with squash, and started getting okay, not very good, but his confidence grew. He started to play in the men's league team. So 16, 17, he's having to interact with men's, and he really came out of a shell and, loved it. He went off to university, came back. He became my main assistant coach of the club. He started running the whole junior program. He grew the junior program from like 40 kids up to 90 kids. He did that for several years until he was about 25, completely flourished in this human being that I can't even describe it, how awesome he is. And then he stopped. He was like, you know what? I need to become a teacher. That's my calling. I need to stop playing squash, stop coaching it. He loved it. He didn't want to stop it. But yeah, so he chose to use his skill set. I think he had learned and cut his teeth in the world of squash and coaching and mentoring. But going from this kid who, honestly, you would think like, wow, this kid, I don't even know if he's going to, finish his GCSEs kind of vibe. to actually becoming a massively influential teacher. And I think it's one of the most noble professions to have. And he just says, you know what, he the lessons he learns through the lens of squash, and maybe not all of my influence, definitely not, but some of the little lessons I was talking to him, forget about hitting a ball any differently. It was like, so like, what is your goal, and why do you want to hit the ball that way? And okay, so what does that then mean when you're playing in a match, and how can you be mentally tough? And then actually, if you're losing, how can you deal with failure? How can you deal with setbacks? How are you dealing with confrontations? And yeah, so that's maybe one example of someone who came through the lens of squash and sport and pivoted really well into something else. And really quickly, another example of it's one of these American kids, like very much on the path to going to college, a lot of SquashMind work, and yeah, got to 18 and he was like, Dad, Mom, I do not want to play squash anymore. And he actually felt brave enough to step forward to his folks. He'd invested 4 or 5 years of time, effort, money, energies. But he's going to study to become a cardiologist and a surgeon, a heart surgeon. And I'm like, how noble is that? Like, okay, if he had gone through the lens of squash and that, great, he might have done some really good stuff. But he actually realized that going, yeah, I love my squash, I love sport, but actually pivoted really well and actually was brave enough, and hopefully it was a tiny bit of my influence. Maybe the parents don't thank me, but actually the parents have contacted me since and said, do you know what? He's 100% happier than he's ever been, because maybe the parents were living through him rather than him letting himself express it. So sorry, kind of a long couple of stories there, but hope that helps.
No, that's awesome. So I mean, so like let's maybe switch back more to who we are, and we're a bunch of middle-aged male amateurs muddling our way through life. Most of us have a job, some are in between jobs, most are in relationships and or have kids. The only thing that we can say that we're professionals at are probably our jobs. That's probably about it. I'll speak for myself. So I've heard you speak of the interplay between on-court versus off-court mindset. Mm-hmm. So on-court being, let's just say on-court being our professional lives, and off-court being at home, away from work, in the community, and how off-court mindsets and circumstances can have a spillover effect into your on-court performance or into your work. Mm-hmm. So can you just speak to us a little bit about the spillover effect and how you see this interplay happening?
Yeah, one of the first lessons you'll come across in the SquashMind app, and when you go through the introduction course, I think it's like the 3rd lesson in there, called the spillover. And in simple terms, everything we do goes into everything we do. It's very hard to compartmentalize, and I'll just use the lens of squash to start with. So I'll have players come to me and go, oh, you know what, I played that match and I couldn't focus. I knew I wanted to do this, but I couldn't do this. And then I asked them a few questions. So, okay, so how was your drive to the court? You'll never believe it. Like, I got a phone call from my boss and, he was on my back about things. Like, okay, interesting. And they said, so what happened the rest of the day? And he goes, I kind of woke up and, my kids would kind of do my head in and this stuff. And, I snapped at them and almost I just let him speak. And eventually I just go, well, okay, so you've told me like, the time you spent in your day, so squash you play for an hour, right? But the 11, 12 hours before that, your attitude, your behavior has been one of reactiveness, lots of high and low emotions, lots of impulsivity, lots of distractions, lots of multitasking. And so all you're doing is you're fueling that part of your brain. What we practice grows stronger. And especially on a subconscious level, if we're inputting, kind of computer terminology, garbage in, garbage out, if we're inputting certain amount of garbage, and whether that be our mindset, our attitudes, our reactions to things, our continual changing and not being in the moment and not trying to stay present, how are we expected to then step onto a squash court when the pressure is a little bit higher and we're expecting to win and we're playing a league match for our team, and all of a sudden click another part of our brain into gear that we've not even practiced and just expect to be mentally tough, clear, focused, executing the thing we want to do? Impossible, absolutely impossible. So a lot of the early parts of what I try work with players is go, yeah, we want to make you a better squash player, but let's step back a bit. Can we make you a better human being? Can we make you better at confrontations, conflict, difficulties in your day-to-day life? For me, that's arguably more valuable. You know, squash is a tiny part of your life. Even though some of these players are doing a lot of it and playing professional, it's still a smaller part of your life than your whole life. So are you practicing the virtues and the values and the person you want to be away from that context? And when you start asking people that question, they start to really sit back and go, oh, actually you're right. You kind of, the compartmentalizing, we can get away with it. There's some people who are very good at it. It's a rarity. They're the outliers. I don't know anyone who can have a chaotic, frustrated, way of living and just the attitude that you do when you're under pressure, and then all of a sudden be put into a different environment and expect to be, a Buddhist monk sitting on a mountain meditating. I just don't quite see that correlation there. So yeah, a lot of what I try to do with the players is become self-reflective, have self-efficacy, be your own coach in a way. And this all gets into the whole piece about mindfulness and heightened awareness and just, you're allowed to have the thoughts, you're allowed to have those reactions. But going back to what I said about maybe the Viktor Frankl quote, where's that space? And if you can keep finding those spaces and then choosing your next response, that trains the part of the brain in a better way. It in simple terms, it reduces the amygdala, which is the fear center of your brain, and starts to increase the size of the neurons in the hippocampus, which is a little bit more the kind of the rational thinking side of things. And yeah, the amygdala gets fueled a lot if we're surrounding ourselves with those things that grow and expand it. So yeah, very big on almost what's happening at a subconscious level as well.
So you talk about compartmentalizing, and I guess for us, there's compartmentalizing, there's home versus work, there's when you're amongst adults versus kids, and the dynamics that happen there. So how would you speak to kind of authenticity and being one person at home and being one person at work, and how you can find that optimum where you're not burning a load of energy and willpower to be the person who you aren't meant to be in a professional environment? And maybe you can speak to that through your own experience.
100%. And again, I get it wrong a lot of times still, guys. Like I'm not sitting here proclaiming I've got all the answers. I get it wrong, but I'll just a couple of things. John Dewey talks about, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So I'm very big on having something happen, whether it's good, whether it's bad, but reflecting on that experience. Yes, we have to change hats. Of course, we have to change hats in different environments. But if we're looking at the authenticity side of things, and this is where it becomes a bit more reflective. I'm massive into journaling. I think journaling is one of my keystone habits that I created maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I've got a very big process in the morning, got my evening journaling process, because again, the whole idea is when you journal in the morning, you then hold yourself to court martial in the evening. You kind of put your day out for review. You go, what I set down and what I wanted to do in the morning, have I been that person? And where have I done well and where have I failed? And for me, I think the more we can get ourselves to be reflective and honest with ourselves, and that's why journaling is great, because it's all just you. No one else has to see it. Again, I can share with you guys afterwards some of the research and the science behind journaling, which I think is one of the genuinely most powerful habits that I think I've created. And by the way, the journaling is not necessarily a nice place. Sometimes it's a dark place, but it gets that monkey mind off, or gets the monkey off my back onto the page, so I can get on with my day, or I can sleep well. And then I go, right, and then we go again. And guess what? We go again. We cultivate those habits. And just a real simple side note, I talk a lot about, I mentioned the Chinese farmer, but the Chinese bamboo tree. It's a really great story about habits and behaviors, where there's this breed of Chinese bamboo tree where you plant it, you have to fertilize and water it every single day. It's really sensitive. And it actually takes 5 years for anything to show. It takes 5 years for the first shoot to show above the surface. But when that first shoot shows above the surface, in 5 weeks, it grows 90 feet. This thing just explodes. And so the question is, has that bamboo tree grown the 90 feet in 5 weeks, or has it grown 90 feet in 5 years? and it's obviously 5 years, but we only see the 5 weeks worth of growth. And the idea is are you looking after your soil? Because under the surface, those roots are going deep, they're going wide to be able to let that Chinese bamboo tree come above the surface and then just explode. And that's what I like to think about, possibly my journaling process, possibly my authenticity, of the habits and behaviors I'm creating. I'm not going to see the outcome. And actually, it might take years to see any outcome. I might never see any outcome. But if I can trust that I am coming back to the soil, I'm looking after it, I'm cultivating it, something is happening. Something is happening under the surface. And actually linking it back to squash, if you practice a shot, you see the outcome straight away. You change your racket face, you see the outcome. If you're practicing a habit of meditation, mindfulness, self-awareness, journaling, visualizations, it's all happening underneath the surface. You do not see the changes on the surface. And that's, I think it's very important to use that story and that analogy of that Chinese bamboo tree to make sure that we understand if we can do this on a steady, regular, consistent basis, the outcome is going to be great at some point. So if we're talking about that authenticity, and for me, it's about reflecting. It's about reflecting and being honest with yourself. And one of my tools is journaling on it.
I think it's amazing because what you mentioned the phrase is holding yourself court-martial, and I think one of the things that's sort of I've struggled with in the past is how you actually hold yourself accountable, and you make these New Year's resolutions, or you make promises to yourself that you're going to change something or you're going to do something, but it very seldom actually results. But and again, that I guess that also goes back to your point about there's my gold framed objective, but how am I actually living into that objective on a day-to-day basis with my habits and routines? So I think that's an amazing way and a great habit to be able to hold yourself accountable, because in many respects we are judge, jury, and executioner, and just to be able to have that kind of approach to be able to make that happen on a daily basis so that it actually sticks.
Just sorry, Duncan, Tom asks a great question that I think it might be worth addressing about, is there a structure used? Are you happy for me to address that?
Yeah, absolutely, please.
So Tom, great question. I've wrestled with the structure, and it's pretty set now, but it might change in the future. So I've got actually two journals, and the reason I have two, I'll give you a thing. There's an amazing book called The Daily Stoic. I'm not trying to push any stoicism onto anyone, but you read the date of the lesson today, and it'll give you a lesson from Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus or Seneca, reflecting on themselves and kind of going, and then it gets interpreted into the modern world going. I think today's one was about I can't quite remember today's one, but the one that was very recent was all about running your race. So again, not comparing yourself to others, right? And then you journal on that Stoic lesson. So there's also a daily Stoic journal. So I would read the passage and I would just reflect on that. But my second journal, there's a bit more structure. So what I do is my first bit of the second journal, which is a freestyle journal, it always starts with some gratitude. And by the way, the science behind gratitude, I've written a lot about gratitude. And it's not just empty gratitude. It's gratitude where you actually sit with it for about 10 or 15 seconds. You actually recognize the emotions coming up when you're writing about the gratitude. You can probably imagine, I actually genuinely, and not bluffing, I could get out and show you, I was grateful for having the opportunity to talk tonight on the subject that I love. So it starts with a bit of gratitude. And then second of the third parts of that freestyle journal go into just a bit more of an open freestyle, going, okay, I've got an interesting day. I've got possibly a confrontational conversation with someone later. I'm looking forward to the lessons I'm going to get to give today. Or I know I need to do a little bit of planning, so I better just take care of that. And I always finish my morning journal with one thing to avoid. And I think this is something I haven't seen anywhere else, but I asked myself, what do I need to avoid today? And today was about multitasking. I was like, I had so many different things I needed to do. So that's my morning structure, is the gratefulness piece, like what am I grateful for? Then just like a bit of a thought about the day and what I need to do and what I need to be accountable for, and then something to avoid. And then in the evening, I read back of what I've written. I then I reflect and I write kind of what I think I've done based on what I try to do. And then I always finish off with a positive. It's always about finding that little positive. Like, even if it was the worst day, my divorce papers came through today, right? But there's something positive that goes. It's not, and sometimes it's hard, but you can always find that one layer of positivity. So yeah, the daily stoic one's nice because it's a kind of, you meditate on a passage and you think about it. And then the other one is a little bit more kind of formulaic, but also it has a bit of a freestyle approach. So and by the way, Tom, that can change. I might slightly tweak it on different days. Some days I'll just write 3 pages of just freestyle. Other days I might write 2 things of gratefulness, and that's all I can do. I just but I mastered the art of showing up. I literally show up to that every single day, and that for me is my keystone habit. Mastering the art of showing up, whether come rain or shine, whatever mood I'm in, I don't care. The journaling gets in, and that for me is a real powerful piece.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jesse. So I spoke to some of the packs before this interview, and I asked some of them, and I think some of this possibly would have resonated with you as well. But there are challenges that we all have, and you've mentioned some of your own challenges, Jesse. But they range from injury to image consciousness to anxiety and depression, challenges with kids, relationships, and in F3, the longer these persist, they culminate in what we call 3 symptoms of the sad clown, which if you watch The Sopranos, the sad clown is the person who's laughing on the outside and crying on the inside. And the longer that persists, it then culminates in Pogo 40, which is man's inconsistent health, which results in yo-yoing, or like a pogo stick, 40 pounds off, 40 pounds on, 40 pounds off, 40 pounds on. Or it's the reacher. I'm sure you've seen Tom Cruise and in Jack Reacher, but where the individual just checks out, or it's we call it the sifter, which is, imagine sand in a sieve or a sifter. When life starts to shake, small particles fall through, and if you're not careful, you're left with nothing left in the sieve, because all of the small particle friendships and relationships have fallen through, and you have no large particle relationships. And so those are really the relationships that help you see through the shaking of life and withstand that shaking. So when we've talked about goals, and the kind of the title of this interview is kind of esse quam videre, which is to be rather than to seem. So if you say you want to be something, or you want to be someone, or you want to be this future, how would you finding what that future is, so that then you can start to do those habits, I don't know, tomorrow? So say I want to be a certain way, or I want to get to a certain place. I kind of feel like I need to know what that is first before I then say, okay, right, I'm going to start doing these are my keystone habits that I need to work on.
Internet just kind of jabbed a little bit there, Duncan. I think I got a bit of your question. I'm going to ask you to repeat a little bit of it. Just before we do that, I've just stuck 4 things in the chat there, which are what I've been referring to quite a bit: a journaling blog, a little bit on gratitude, goal setting one, and some habits and their effectiveness. So again, it's through the lens of squash, but they come through so many different life lenses. So Duncan, just if you could just clarify the kind of question, are you talking about the goal we should set, or the habits that we need to break it down to? I didn't quite understand what you were asking.
Okay, so we've talked about the habits that you do every day in order to get you to a destination.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you go about, what are the first steps that you feel you need to take in order to define that destination or that future state that you want to be? I think doing daily habits is tangible, and I think it's easily understood. And you can say you can start journaling tomorrow and journal in the morning, journal in the evening. But if you want to be a certain way, or you want to reach a certain future point, whether that be a mindset or whatever, what would you say would be your first steps that you would take in order to define that future before you start doing the kind of daily routines and habits?
Sure. I think, and you definitely don't want to rush to define your future as well. I think a lot of people kind of, you want to sit with it. You want to wrestle with it a little bit. You want to speak to close friends and family. You know, the amazing stuff that F3 is. You want to have an outlet to talk about it. And you know what, get influence from the right people. Like, surround yourself with the right people. So I don't think, you know, it's so hard because I'm such a big believer in, you know, we're always wanting this destination and we're always wanting to get to this point, but we can set that, but we also need to forget it. I know it sounds really weird to say that, because it's more about the person you become along the way. It's more about, yes, we want to do that, but actually you're aiming for that. But as you're doing for it, you might have to pivot and flex and your directions change. And that means you might not reach that goal you want, and that's fine. Is it the person you're becoming along the way? But let me keep coming back to your question, Dan, because I think it's a really important, good question. There's quite a famous, I don't know if it's a study or what it is, but it's the statement of, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most amount of time with. And I really like, I don't know if you've heard that before, but I do.
I wrote that down as you were talking, as you were saying. I was writing that down.
Nice. And I think that's quite an important place to put yourself. So rather than you thinking of the destination, I think, and again, I'm really pausing because I'm thinking what I'm doing in this situation, where my goal is. And if I'm honest, my goal is not necessarily to have SquashMind as the global app, and great if it is, and it's becoming that. But I'm like, I'm getting so much more value in the processes, in those little bits along the way, and my personal true happiness is kind of here and now. It's being mindful, it's being present, it's this bit. And yes, it's nudging me on a river that's got slightly changing courses and finding little routes in different directions. So I'll refer you a little bit to, I saw him live just after lockdown, Tim Minchin, an amazing kind of Aussie comedian, but performer, goes on stage. And he gave one of the most amazing commencement speeches when he went back to Australia to talk to his university. And it was something along the lines of, you know what, be wary of long-term goals, you know, be micro ambitious, get wrapped up in that thing you're doing right here and right now. And actually, if you just pause for a sec, I'm going to bring up the quote because I've got it on my little notes thing, and I refer back to it often. I think it's such an important little thing he says, and I think it really might help answer some of the questions here, Duncan. Here he goes. So what he says is, I advocate passionate dedication to the pursuit of short-term goals. Be micro ambitious. Put your head down and work with pride on whatever is in front of you. You never know where you might end up. Just be aware that your next worthy pursuit will probably appear in your periphery, which is why you should be careful of long-term dreams. If you focus too far in front of you, you won't see the shiny thing out the corner of your eye. I think it's a great little statement there, and I'm just going to copy and paste that into the chat if that's okay. I think that's so. Yeah. So for 1 second, I'm not saying we can't be ambitious and we can't try and push ourselves, but equally so is that bright shiny thing in your periphery arguably more exciting and slightly better than that long-term blinkered goal that you're just going, I'm going on there and I'm putting such hard guide rails on myself. So I think it's a combination of both. You know, I love the idea of surrounding yourself with the right people, because they can become a big influence in what you're doing in your life. Massively important, the average of the 5 people that you spend the most amount of time with. being reflective is a huge piece. And you know, because I think sometimes if you set that goal and you put your flag in the sand, are those your golden handcuffs as well? Can that become something so restricting that you can't actually flex and mold? Fine if you think you can flex and mold within that path, which I think you need to. So I'm probably not giving you a direct answer there, because my personal configuration isn't necessarily I need to reach this amount, or I need to be validated by the squash lessons I give or the world-class person I coach. If that comes along the way, I'm grateful and thankful for it. If it doesn't come along the way, I'm grateful and thankful for 1,000 other things that are ridiculously valuable in my life. So yeah, I think it's for me, it's more of a middle ground, and that's not to kind of be too kind of flaky or not commit. Do you know what? It actually makes me commit harder to that micro ambitious goals. Again, you know, I do a big concept of deep work. I try to get at least an hour and a half of deep work in. Every distraction is off. That's where I'm creating the content I want to create. Again, similar to my journaling, the deep work piece comes in almost every single day. And almost that's kind of my goal at the moment, is going, I need to do deep work, and I'm just loving the deep work. And if I can create some content that's good enough, great, people might like it. Just one more little point here. A guy called Cal Newport wrote a book called Be So Good They Can't Ignore You. And it's a really interesting book along the lines we're talking about, is going, yeah, you know, be so good with yourself, your benchmarks, your yardstick. And if you're producing content or you're speaking to someone or you're influencing someone, be so good they can't ignore you. Don't kind of try and enforce your thing on something or someone else. Be so good for yourself, people won't ignore you in that sense. And I think that's quite a nice little message there as well.
I love that. I love that. So we've got some, and I've had it as well, where, and possibly you've experienced it as well, where the packs love turning up for beatdowns. They love coming for workouts, and they love it for many different reasons. You may have loved turning up to practice, loved to training because you got to interact with some of your fellow players, the friendships that are made. I know you've made a lot of amazing friendships along the way from being on the tour. And in the same way, the packs love turning up to workouts. And unfortunately, we get injured along the way. And suddenly, that source of banter in the morning, the small bite chunks of friendship and fellowship that you get in the mornings, and those interactions suddenly disappear. And when that happens, the rest of the guys are still out there. They're still having fun. They still interacting. The jokes are being cracked, and you're missing out. So there's FOMO. There's you miss out on the fun, the camaraderie, the companionship. And also for some, there's a loss of that validation from the physical achievement or the accomplishment that fuels a lot of us. So, and to a certain extent, there's also a feeling of kind of letting other people down by not turning up for them. And also, when you're injured, you don't know how long your body's going to take to get you back out there. And so there's that element of not knowing. So maybe this is quite a specific example, but what would you say to that?
Again, I'm going to look at it through the lens of squash, if that's okay. I think that's my field where I'm quite okay at. Working with a few injured athletes at the moment, so you know, hopefully I can share some lessons here. I'll give you one quick story. A guy called Nick Matthew, 3-time world champion, one of the greatest players ever to play squash, English player. He's retired a few years ago. Before the Glasgow Commonwealth Games, he had a crazy bad meniscus tear in his knee, and he was on the operating table 6 weeks before the Commonwealth Games, getting his left knee, you know, basically replaced. And, you know, everyone was like, mate, you'll be lucky to kind of actually put weight on that knee in 6 weeks, never mind playing the Commonwealth Games. And he said, I'm playing in those games, guys. So get with the program. And what he did, he found every single opportunity to train every other part of his body besides that knee. So he isolated that knee. He goes, I've got one knee, but I've got my right leg, I've got my right arm, my left arm, I've got my core, I've got my head, I've got everything else I can do to train. And there's videos of him sitting on a stool with an exercise bike on his right and just churning one pedal exercise bike, and his left leg just being isolated in a cast. He's got videos of him sitting himself on a squash court on a stool, getting fed by his coach and hitting balls. And he found the opportunity to work every single other part of his body. And he said the biggest part he worked was his mind. He visualized, he did all of these scenarios in his mind. And the first time he stepped on court was 6 weeks later, first round of the Commonwealth Games, hadn't played a competitive match for 6 weeks. And at this level, that's game changing. And he went and got a gold medal. It was unbelievable. The final he played, it's kind of goosebump territory, this. And yeah, like he was kind of almost hobbling by the end. And he played for another 3-4 years after this. So it wasn't like he completely damaged himself. But I think that's a great example of finding the opportunity when you've got a limitation. Something's happened, something out of your control. You don't control what happens, you control how you respond. And yes, you might not be able to replace the camaraderie of what you're talking about, Duncan. Nick was maybe lucky enough that he had maybe some coaches and physios so he could have that banter. But even if he didn't, I think there was still opportunities in the difficulties, in the challenges. We've talked about the difficulties of COVID and some of the success stories, and there's some interesting ones. Like Walt Disney did his stuff in the Great Depression. FedEx was formed in the 1970s crash. There's so many examples of global things that have happened, but out of that rubble has been the fertilizer for those things to grow out of. And I think what Nick did there pretty much almost inspired me, I think, if I'm really because I was telling that story before COVID even hit to players who are getting injured, going, yeah, you know what? One thing is gone from your life. It doesn't mean your whole life, your whole squash thing's over. Where can you find other places to grow, to get better? So I don't know if there's an example I could give for your situation, but if you can think about where are your opportunities, where can you reach out if you need that validation or not the validation or just kind of the feeling of camaraderie or that group. I'm sure there's other ways, and maybe you could think of some, Duncan, that you can find. But I suppose it comes back to the mindset. Like, what lens are you looking at through? Are you looking through a growth mindset or a fixed mindset? Growth mindset, always looking for failure is your feedback. Failure is your teacher. You fail forward, you fail upwards. Those concepts are really, really big in high-level professional sport. So Nick couldn't control what happened with his knee, but he controlled his response amazingly well, and he got every single opportunity out of himself. So that would be my message, really.
Oh, well, you've just robbed my next question. So I was going to ask about what your overarching advice or guidance would be that you would give when you talk about failing forward. So maybe explain what you mean by failing forward, and maybe what lens you might look at kind of off the court. There's challenges that you have maybe, and there's challenges that, I mean, us as average Joes at the point of life where we're at now, maybe you could maybe pick a few examples of what kind of failing forward might look like for an average Joe dad who lives in Guildford or Cranley or Godalming or Basingstoke, and what that failing forward might look like.
And yeah, I apologize, it's getting way dark here and the light can't go any higher, by the way. So hopefully you can just see the glow from my head at some point, keeping us going. So yeah, listen, failing forward is a huge part of life. I think it's a huge part of what I think we all can try do better. Yeah, in competitive sport, you're going to fail a lot. You're going to fail in your practice sessions. You're going to fail in your practice matches. You're going to fail in your tournaments. And if you look at it through the lens of being defined by that failure, and failure is only a failure if you're putting into that bucket of failure. It's quite a famous Nelson Mandela quote: "I never lose. I either win or I learn." I really like that quote. I never lose. I either win or I learn. And that's, I think, a lot of times what we got to try and do is figure out how we, and again, so you're asking for examples of people our age. I can't quite think of any, in all honesty, because everyone's version of failure is going to be slightly different, whether it's professional, whether it's relationships, whether it's at home, whether it's in a pursuit of an activity. But this is where Carol Dweck did a lot of work on growth mindset. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, where it's reframing it into the word, and she's done a lot of research on the power of the word yet. And when she's done loads of studies with all these kids in like schools in Chicago, New York, everywhere, it's the way they get praised or the way they get spoken to when they've achieved the task or haven't even achieved the task, when they've done tests and they haven't been able to pass it. Kids that were praised on their talents and their skill failed massively in future endeavors. Kids that were praised on their efforts, their processes, their ability to try and figure the task out, massively tried the skills more and got better at those skills that they couldn't do. And it was all the concept of the word yet. So teachers started marking papers, rather than saying wrong, they just changed it to saying not yet. And so they didn't get the answer, but it was the word yet that showed they were on a journey. They were on a journey of discovery and growth and moving forward. And it's such a powerful little word, yet. And that I talk a lot about that in with the inner voice going, oh, I can't beat that person. I can't beat that opponent. I can't beat that opponent yet. Or I can never get that shot out that deep backhand corner. Or I can't get the shot out the deep backhand corner yet. And it might only sound small, but just the way you speak to yourself, your inner voice, and the way you can reframe a situation. And a lot of top high level sport is about reframing tactics. And by the way, you're not trying to ignore things or push things down, but reframing it in a way that gives you the ability that you're on a journey. So, again, I don't think I want to try using examples because I might make a fool of myself. But if anyone's thinking of this and what they deemed as failure, and go, okay, well, can I learn from this? Can I add the word yet in there somewhere? And can this make me move forward on a journey that, you know what, it's only going to add layers to me as a human being, because when that situation arrives again, you know what, if I've reflected and thought about how I want to do this next time, that's growth. That's failing forward, failing upwards, failing with a positive intent. And we don't like failure. We don't seek failure. I'm not saying go and seek failure. But when it arrives at our door, which it is always going to arrive at our door in whatever context it is, go, okay, right. That's almost like thank you, because you know what? That is only going to make me a slightly stronger person. And one more little kind of note I just want to add in here, Duncan. I'm actually on the lookout for critics. And I know it sounds quite weird and it's hard. It's uncomfortable because, I think a lot of what I do on the squash court and I coach, a lot of people think I do an okay job of it. People say, hey, listen, great. SquashMind's great. The lesson's great. I'm going, thank you. I appreciate it. But I'm kind of knowing that that's arguably making me more comfortable. Is it making me better at what I do? And actually, if someone can pull me up and go, no, that actually wasn't very good, and I thought you were pretty rubbish at that, I'm going, great. It's hard, but can I actually hear that? Can I take it on? Because that's what actually moves the ball down the field, probably slightly stronger than just the overly positive compliments on things. So, and by the way, it's hard because I get it. I'm like, my first instinct is like, no, damn, you're wrong. But I'm like, actually, I needed to hear that because then I can iterate and change and move forward. But that's because of the growth mindset I talk about and try to use with myself.
Love that. Absolutely love that. And I remember that, Jesse.
So, because you said it to me a couple of times, you said, oh, like you've said something and then you've like apologized quite quickly afterwards. And I think I've even said to you in a WhatsApp, I've said, no, dude, that's kind of what I need to hear. Like, there's things, I say this as a coach, there's things as a coach, I think the biggest responsibility I have, should I tell my player what they want to hear or what they need to hear? It's such a big differentiator. I had this conversation with a 15-year-old girl. She's number one in the country at the moment. And she's getting a little bit of an ego on her. And every time I tell her something that she needs to get better at, she just rebels. I said a whole lesson was on this. I said, Megan, do you want me to tell you what you want to hear so you feel great about things? Or if I tell you what you need to hear, you could be one of the best players this country's ever seen, kind of thing. And it really got her to stop and pause. And I think we can reflect on that on ourselves sometimes. Do we need to hear things we want to hear or need to hear? But yeah, good point there, Tom. Good point. I like that one.
So I see we've been going for just over an hour, Jesse. So I guess just one final question, and then we'll wrap up. Is just really on how it's often said that comparison is the thief of joy. And you've talked about running your own race, and which is why we in F3 we try and hammer it into the packs that it's you versus you. I'll do me, you do you, and we all have our own constraints. We might have an injury. Yes, we're trying to maybe isolate, but the main thing is that we got out there and we're doing it. Nick Matthew, he got out on the court. He was sitting on a stool, but he was there doing it. And so I guess kind of balancing balancing the you versus you. What are your maybe closing thoughts on comparison being the thief of joy and running your own race?
Well, totally. I'm sharing my screen with you guys here now. This is one of the big lessons I give in SquashMind, and this picture is really telling. You got Michael Phelps there, his rival Chad Lacrosse in the opposite lane halfway through a race. Michael is going, here we go, people. I'm running my race. I'm doing what I need to do. And his compatriots looking across going, crap, what is he doing? I need to react to him. And I think it's such a telling picture. I know it's only one snapshot on the whole race, and there might be other context here, but just for the sake of running your own race, this for me is so powerful. And by the way, Michael Phelps he can run his race at this moment because he's an Olympic gold medalist, but he was doing this when he was young. Like, he wasn't winning races when he was young. He was in the middle of the pack, but his coach was always like, he was running his race. He knew what he needed to do. He was holding himself accountable to himself. So for me, that's what I'm wrestling with on a personal level, and what I'm trying to coach as well within SquashMind and even my lessons is the definition of success. It's a huge thing that I get players to try think about before matches. And the definition of success is all about 100% control. You've got your controllable bucket and your uncontrollable bucket. There's a lot of stuff that goes into uncontrollable bucket. What do you have 100% control over? And it's trying to understand, yes, I can deliver on that. It's actionable. And if I can define my success based on my judgment, my benchmarks, and the way I feel I'm doing something with that energy, with that passion, with that dedication. And if I can keep doing that and create a streak, track my habits, get things stacked up over time, the Chinese bamboo tree, am I coming back and fertilizing and watering my soil? For me, that becomes success. That's the definition of success. If along the way you get these nice shiny trophies or validations, or the PSA endorsements or the head endorsement for SquashMind, lovely, brilliant, enjoy it, celebrate the baby steps along the way. But that's not my destination. That shouldn't be our destination. For me, it's a continual journey, this, and that's the beauty about it. I think if we wanting to get to a destination, once we get there, do we just stop? Do we just pack up and go, we're done, people? Like, obviously not. But what have you done along the way? Like, how have you tried to run your race to the best of your ability? Whether that becomes success or failure to other people, sounds blunt, guys, but so what? You can't control what other people think. You can't control what they're going to say about you. We've got such a negativity bias built into our mind. You have an amazing day, everything happens really well, great bit of work, family. You get that one passing comment from a stranger on social media. Guess what you remember? You remember that negative thing, don't we? And we got that negativity bias. And can we reframe that? Can we go, well, actually, fine, we can have the feeling of that happening, but we don't need to get behind the energy of that. We can get behind the energy of our definition of success and what we are holding ourselves accountable to, our yardstick and our benchmark. And it needs constant reassessing. It's not like you said it once and you just keep, it's that reflective piece, it's that journaling piece, it's that honesty piece with yourself, your accountability to yourself. I know with F3, there's a good accountability with others as well. So that'll be my final message. I know there's a lot of strands, but I probably hopefully connected them there a little bit all together, because I all think they overlap slightly as well. So yeah, I hope that helps. And again, if not, if it just gets you to reflect a little bit, that's great as well.
Jesse, this has been amazing. I just want to say thank you so much. There's a lot of takeaways for me. the daily court martial, holding
Mhm.
myself up. Did I do what I said I would do? Is definitely a highlight for me, just in terms of something really tangible that I can take back. And thanks to all the guys who joined as well and threw in their comments and their questions. I really appreciate it. Jesse, massive thanks, and really wish you all the best onwards and upwards with SquashMind. I feel like there's so much to learn from what you've shared from through the lens of squash. It's been amazing. So thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you, guys. And listen, thank you for all taking a bit of time to come on today. I just absolutely, hopefully you can see I really love this. I'm passionate about it. Duncan, for setting this up as well, and for all the great work you're doing, bringing F3 across to the UK. Man, some noble stuff here, and you know, changing people's lives in a positive way. And listen, good luck, everyone. I think you're in great hands if you're hanging out with this man a bit more often. Happy days, man. I wish I could get to see him a bit more, but that's partly my fault. I need to carve out some good time to go hang out with him.
The edge continues.
Exactly. Cheers,
Thanks,
everyone.
Jesse.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Cheerio. Bye-bye.